very interesting guest on right now on Skype with me. So we will go to him live in just a second. He is an author. He is a radio show host. He is quite the personality. And so this will be very entertaining. This will be fun. Eric Metaxas is with us on Skype. He has a new book. I'll show you the book. It's called Seven More Men, follow up to his Seven Men. And we're going to talk a little history, a little biography, and I will get his take on some current events. So we'll have some hot takes on what's going on in the world right now. And things are crazy, but we're here. So glad you're with us. Chat is open. Feel free to ask questions throughout. Make your comments. Go ahead and hit share, hit retweet. If you're not subscribed to these channels, subscribe so you can watch Life Today every day and you can see more great conversations like this one. Eric Metaxas, how are you doing?
This is high tech, brother. I'm just kind of amazed at how many different formats we're on. I'm learning a lot. During this virus shutdown, I'm forced to do my own radio program, from right here, and it's crazy. Whether it's on Zoom or Skype or any of this stuff, I'm learning more than I wanted to learn. Can I be honest?
Yeah, I get it, because so are churches. Everybody is. What's entertaining for me is that I've been doing this for a while and saying, hey, the internet is where people are, and so we need to be doing more on the internet. People are like, yeah, especially me. I'm a legacy broadcast entity, right? So they're like,
right.
My dad's like, who's watching the internet? I got my satellite TV, and my kids are like, what's Papa watching over there? Anyway, so welcome to the future.
Are you there?
Yep.
I just heard I was getting one of those feedbacks. This is what I'm saying. I'm learning. So
yeah.
Forgive me.
So now what Eric's trying to do out there is share this on Facebook and retweet it on Twitter. Which Eric, if you're not seeing it, just refresh your browser or refresh your
No,
screen.
I did it.
Okay.
I believe I've accomplished my
that
goal.
could be where you're getting a little bit of the looping thing, because there is.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was.
Yeah. So for the rest of you guys out there, go ahead and hit share. All right, let's jump into your book. I just showed them. I'm going to show them again. It's called Seven More Men and the Secret of Their Greatness. And we were talking, before we get into some of the current events, I want to talk about the men in this book and why you chose them. So give me an overview of the book. I see that you've got a couple of them sitting back there in your background. That's good, by the way.
That's intentional. That's
yes.
That's very clever marketing on my part.
That is. Although I like the chair even better.
Thank you.
The stripes. So.
Shitty taste for somebody's taste. No, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I first got to meet your mom and dad when I wrote my Bonhoeffer book.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was excited about that book. I had written a book on William Wilberforce, and it kind of dawned on me. And those of us who walk with Jesus understand that it's a living relationship, because I had no plans in my life, none, zero, to write biographies, to tell the stories of other people. I always say that I'm, far too self-centered to want to spend that much time writing about someone other than myself. And those who know me know, unfortunately, there's some truth to that. So I had no plans to do this, but the Lord kind of sucked me into it. And then after the Bonhoeffer book, I realized, you know what? These stories of heroes are deeply inspiring to people. And part of why I'm writing them is not just to share information, but to inspire people, because we need inspiration, because we are living in a time when heroism is denigrated, virtue and nobility are denigrated. That wasn't true 50 or 60 years ago, but it's become true. And so we need to share what is God's idea of a great man, of a great woman. So that's when I wrote Seven Men and then Seven Women, because I can't write a book on every one of them. So I said, let me tell the short version of these stories. And it's undeniable that when you encounter these lives, you get inspired. It's just, there's no way around it. I got inspired writing about it. And so, of course, after Seven Men, I thought, I've got a few more men I'd like to write about. So I came up with the very clever title, Seven More Men.
It's good. It's marketable. And it's clear. We know what you're talking about. So the seven men you're talking about, I want to ask you about these. We got Martin Luther, all right, George Whitfield, William Booth and his big bass drum, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, George Washington Carver, one of the most ingenious men in American history, Billy Graham, and then Sergeant Alvin York.
Yeah.
And that one stood out to me because I know absolutely nothing about him.
Right.
Who is he?
Now, you didn't read that chapter, correct?
I haven't gotten the book, so no.
Okay, you haven't gotten the book. Shame on you.
Wow.
No, seriously, Randy, I got to tell you something. Every time I write a book like this, I want to put some people in who are very well known. So people say, "Oh, Billy Graham, I want to read that because I want to, But I always put in somebody, at least somebody, who is not so well known. And Sergeant York is one of those figures. Some people saw the movie with Gary Cooper about Sergeant York's life. It's a little, it's fascinating on two levels, at least. Sergeant York is, he's a farm boy. He was a big sinner. He had a big salvation experience pretty late in life. I think he was 28 or something like that. And he got, when people get saved and then other people get really saved and they kind of become fanatical or they kind of become, it can be a good thing. It happened to me when I was 25. You're all in. And this man, like many born again believers, and I'm sure it happened to you, it happened to me, and it happens to our friends, they will focus in, they'll home in on a scripture, and they forget that we're supposed to look at the whole counsel of the scripture, not just one verse, And he sees where it says, it's pretty clear, thou shalt not kill. Well, that settles it for him. I cannot go to war. This was World War I. I can't fight. And it's just fascinating because there's a lesson there that what you think you're reading in the Bible, sometimes you're not reading in the Bible. It doesn't really say thou shalt not kill. It really says thou shalt do no murder, right?
Right.
Because clearly all through Scripture, God allows killing. David kills Goliath. He doesn't repent. He doesn't say, wow, I really blew it, Lord, forgive me. He repents after what happens with Bathsheba and with Uriah the Hittite. But the killing of Goliath and many other of these killings in the Bible are allowable. We might not want to celebrate it, but there are people who will read something that says do not kill and they think that means killing is out. I got that question a million times with my Bonhoeffer book. How can a man of God get involved in a plot to kill Hitler? And I thought to myself, how can a man of God become a police officer or go into the military? Because you're going to be given weapons which you may need to use, but it's not to murder. You need to understand there's murder and then there's necessary killing, which is lamentable, but it's a big difference. And so finally he was convinced that, yes, it's okay to go to war. And he goes to war and he performs a feat so heroic. It's kind of funny. It's kind of an American story. He was this backwoodsman who had an amazing aim. He was a marksman. He could hit a squirrel at, 400 paces. And this guy did something so heroic. I forget the specific details, but it was so amazing that he was feted as a hero. He got a ticker tape parade. I mean, he was absolutely one of the great military heroes of that war. And for the rest of his life, he was famous because of that. So it's just a beautiful story.
And that whole story is in your new book, Seven More Men.
Yes.
Eric Metaxas we're talking to right now. One thing about when you talk about biographies, one thing I figured out, and I have not read that many, just admit it, but I read the first biography of Harriet Tubman.
Yes.
Written by a friend of hers back in the day. And I realized, and she is someone that I had heard about in school and had, read articles on, and especially when they're talking about putting her on the $20 bill and all that kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, yeah, a woman who leads people out of slavery, great. What's wrong with that? That's fabulous. We're all on board. But when I read the original biography of her,
right,
I realized this was a woman of God. This was a woman who was a little spooky in the way she talked to God. And this is a woman who was led by the Spirit around towns where there were people waiting to catch her and put her in jail or worse.
Yes.
We don't get that, unfortunately, in sort of secular biographies in the public school that I grew up in. It just makes me wonder, how much are we missing of our Christian heritage?
Well, you know what, Randy, that is the point of these books. The reason I do half of what I do on my radio program, and in my books is because I see the same thing and I get angry. When I read the story of Jackie Robinson, now Jackie Robinson is in my book, Seven Men. Okay, this is the sequel, Seven More Men. But I remember encountering something that I thought, wait a minute, this guy is one of these seminal figures in the 20th century, especially in the civil rights movement. This guy was a born-again believer. This guy was recruited by Branch Rickey because he was a believer. Branch Rickey was a believer, and Jackie Robinson was a believer. And when they had their meeting, are you going to be the man to break the color barrier in professional baseball? I know how you hit and run and all that stuff, but here's what I need to know. And he opened up a book called The Life of Christ and says to him, will you be willing to turn the other cheek? Will you be willing to not fight back? It was based on his Christian faith. And I said, what? You mean one of the seminal moments that we celebrate in American history is based on Jesus, is based on the willingness of Branch Rickey and this man, Jackie Robinson, to do this thing because Jesus said to do it, and that Jackie Robinson prayed for strength during those difficult 2 early years, and so on and so forth. So I bump into these stories all the time, and whenever I do, first I get angry, and then I say, okay, I need to tell the story. And so a lot of my stories are like that, where you didn't know. And Harriet Tubman is almost certainly going to be in my book, Seven More Women, another clever title coming out a year from now. But I said people need to know George Washington Carver, who is in my book, Seven More Men, incredible man of God, incredible scientist. So there's a lot of these stories, and we're getting a secular version, and that's flat out wrong. I mean, it's immoral, but it's just wrong on every level. And anything I can do to correct that, I do a lot of that on my radio program as well, the Eric Metaxas Show, obviously. And I think it's very important for Americans to understand how much faith plays a role in everything that we praise and everything that we think is good. We need to know that faith is in the middle of it, usually, Christian faith.
Yeah, and if people are wondering where they can hear that, if you're not familiar with that, you can, if you don't get it in a local radio market, you can go to, there it is, ericmetaxas.com. You can see how to spell his name right there.
Yeah.
And listen to the show. A lot of great information. Who in this book did you enjoy writing about the most?
That's always hard to say. It's like trying to pick your favorite child. It's very easy for me because we just have one child. But I'll tell you something. It's you fall in love with these people, you know, and you realize that they're just extraordinary. I think sometimes George Whitfield would rise to that level because he plays such a role in the formation of America. And I wrote a book called If You Can Keep It, about the relationship between faith and virtue and freedom and all this stuff that I was not taught in school, and I was untaught anything like it in college. And I realized that George Whitfield, by the grace of God, he was the greatest evangelist who ever lived in the history of the world. He was absolutely the greatest evangelist. He preached thousands, 18,000 sermons up and down the 13 colonies. And because of that man, we really had revival in America, and we had a kind of connection that people made where they said, you know what, to be born again, to look to God directly, means that I don't have to answer to the magistrate or the governor or whoever is above me. I answer to God. I can govern myself. And by the way, all those leaders, political leaders, they need to answer to God. It just changed everything, and it comes right out of the gospel. You know, this wasn't some Enlightenment idea. This comes right out of the gospel. And so that preaching prepared the American people in the 13 colonies to govern themselves. And I thought, is there a bigger story in history? I mean, America is the greatest, freest country, most wealthy country in the history of the world. And it was founded because a man of God was called by God to preach up and down the colonies, to preach, ye must be born again. I mean, it just goes on and on. Solzhenitsyn's another one that I think there's nobody should be alive and not know the story of Solzhenitsyn. So, of course, I put him in there, too.
Yeah, I mean, great stories. We've got a teacher watching right now who commented that she's getting really excited. So, Nancy, go get 7 men, 7 women, 7 more men, and pre-order if they let you. 7 more women, right? We're not there yet, but we'll get there soon. Okay, so you made a point about George Whitfield's preaching. and the idea that we are to be answerable to God more so than governors or even the president. Well, how do you feel about what's going on right now with some of the things? With two questions. One, the way the president is allowing the governors to take the lead in their states with the federal guidelines in mind, but leaving a lot up to the governors. And then two, some of the actions of the governors.
Well, I got to tell you, pretty much anything this president does, I get behind because he is very shrewd. I'm amazed at his political shrewdness. But the fact of the matter is, this is a teaching moment. Americans are seeing what happens when power-hungry people, and by the way, people are by definition power-hungry, right? We know
Especially
that we are
politicians.
fallen, we are self-serving, and apart from the grace of Jesus, we're self-serving, which is why our government was founded by people who had an understanding of that. They put in checks and balances, and they said, we the people are the government. We the people decide everything. So when you have people who don't understand that in leadership, like in Michigan, the governor of Michigan, and in other states like that, these people they're basically ignorant of what America is. And so they're overreaching in the way that is very natural to human beings to overreach, but it's up to the people. That's us. That's we the people to push back and to say, no, you will not do that in America. I have my rights as an American. I have the Constitution. We need to learn what it means to push back and to say, we are free and we will remain free. And if we have another George III coming along, whether it's a governor or a president, we will pick up muskets at that point, because we're nowhere near that, obviously. But the point is that what we have goes away unless we keep it, which is why I wrote my book, If You Can Keep It. If the people don't understand it, we can't keep it. We can't understand the fragility of it and what's necessary. So the thing is that when I wrote If You Can Keep It, I thought to myself, are we keeping it? For about 50 years, we haven't been teaching these kinds of things. And I realized that what's going on right now with this pandemic is a perfect opportunity for Americans to see what will happen when people get power, when people get an excuse. In my Bonhoeffer book, I write about the famous Reichstag fire, right? Mm-hmm. Hitler and the Nazis jumped all over that. They said, we've got an emergency situation. We're going to take power. And most of the people didn't have a clue. And they thought, oh, okay, it's an emergency. Well, this pandemic is an emergency. How much power will power-hungry people grab? Well, they will grab as much power as we allow them to grab. We have a constitution. We have freedom in America. And I would encourage people in Michigan to protest. You have to send a message to these leaders who's really in charge. The people are in charge. It's not mob democracy, but I'm saying it's the people that are in charge, and we have to hold our leaders to account. And we've got to call them out when they do things that are unacceptable.
Okay, so you mentioned protesting. Do you think that's the best way for the average person to do something? Because I know, in a country out of 380 million people or so, one person feels and seems very powerless. If someone's in a state right now and they think, the way things are going, like Michigan, are not right, is that, you think, the best way for them to go about making their voice known?
Well, another thing in all these books that I write is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every single one of us is created by the Lord in his image to be who we are, not to be Bonhoeffer, not to be Wilberforce, not to be anybody but who we are. And God calls every one of us to do different things. Some of us can do amazing things. Some of us have limitations. Some of us have the number one thing is to take care of our kids or to be a loving spouse. And so we've all got to take the pressure off and just say, Lord, what are you calling me to do? Now, number one, everybody needs to vote for people who get what we're talking about. So if you have a governor like they do in Michigan, or you have a mayor like we do in New York City, or a governor like we do in New York City, these folks don't understand this. Some of that is willful. Some of that is just pure ignorance because they grew up around people that they never talk about this. They're not watching this show. But the point is, number one, we need to understand that being a believer and being an American, we have to be at least political enough to take voting very seriously. Because when you allow the wrong person to get in by not voting, it almost happened in this last election. People said, I'm not going to vote for Trump. He's vulgar. He's been married 3 times, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you don't vote and somebody else gets in who maybe has very different values than the founders or you or me, you're on the hook for that. God doesn't give you a pass. We need to vote. We need to take this coming election very seriously. But that's basic. I think that there's a million other things we can do. And honestly, Randy, the reason I write my books and do my radio program is to be a resource to believers, to say, this can help you understand some of this. This can put some flesh on the bones, because it's not easy. We can't all sit around and study. We're not all theologians, you know. And I really do think that I try to write and to speak in such a way that helps people begin to understand how to do this. I think a lot of it has to do with this kind of education and, you know, sharing these ideas with our friends and our relatives and stuff, and beginning to understand what maybe we didn't need to understand 20 years ago because we had all the religious freedom we liked. But today we have governors saying you cannot go to a drive-in service. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You better be kidding me, because in America, that sounds pretty unconstitutional to me.
Yep, we're talking to Eric Metaxas, author of 7 More Men, available now. And if you didn't read 7 Men and 7 Women, well, now you got 3 books that'll occupy you for at least a few great days at home. And speaking of at home, and by the way, if you don't listen to Eric Metaxas' show, you can listen to that online if you don't have any local radio area. You can see it top right there. Listen to Eric Metaxas' show. That's on ericmetaxas.com. And Eric, you are in New York City, am I right?
I live in New York City. I was born in New York City. I'm a missionary in New York City, a conservative Christian living here with my wife and our daughter. But there's a lot of wonderful believers and churches in this city. It's surprising, actually, when you get to know what is happening in New York. Good things are happening here.
Yeah, and I believe you, but I also know that you're in the center of this whole virus. Some bad things are happening there. How is it, and what are you seeing?
Well, you know, I have to say, I live on the Upper East Side, which is where a lot of wealthy people live. I'm not wealthy, I'm a writer. So a lot of the wealthy people have gone off to their country homes. So it's kind of lonely around here.
Wow.
People like me, we're still here, but the streets are quiet. I'm sure it's quite different in Queens, where I grew up, and in other parts of the city. The one thing that is happening here, I'll tell you, about a half a mile from where I'm sitting, Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse has set up a field hospital in Central Park. I visited them twice. I actually gave them a bunch of copies of 7 More Men just to thank these nurses, these volunteers. It's an amazing thing that God's people have shown up. These are people that faced down the Ebola virus, and they are here doing the Lord's work. And again, it's not far from where I'm sitting. So I actually believe we're experiencing a cultural reset, that people are discovering things, many people drawing closer to God. It seems clear to me that people are watching more sermons on Sunday than if they had to go drive and fight for parking. So God is really doing something in America. So I rejoice. I know the Lord is using this for his purposes.
Yeah, and what Franklin's doing there in Central Park is really pretty amazing, and it's really a very traditional American thing for the church to come in and help the community like that. Yet he is facing some criticism. What do you make of sort of just the fact that it's Franklin Graham, or the fact that a Christian organization sets up an emergency hospital is somehow controversial? Kind of just makes me scratch my head.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I think that you know, because we live in a free country, people are allowed to have different views. So people can have different views on sexuality than we have. It's America, right? But they cannot force me to agree with them. And right now you're seeing people, they're basically nasty activists. I know gay people who would never agree to anything like this. These are friends of mine. We disagree on some fundamentals, but they wouldn't do this. But there are activists, they're nasty, and anytime they get an opportunity to name call and to shut people down, they want to say, if you don't have my view of things, you're a bigot. So evidently, everyone who has a biblical view of sexuality, including Jesus, is a bigot, is a homophobe, is a monster, and needs to be shut down. We all know in America that's nonsense. That since the beginning of time, every Muslim, every Christian, every serious Jew has a certain view of sexuality that is wildly different from the sexual view of the cultural elites. And the idea that Franklin Graham's organization is being singled out as though they're the only ones. But this is what these people do. They pick you off because nobody else speaks up. And that's the big lesson I got from my Bonhoeffer book, is like, when someone's being attacked, even if you're not exactly with that person, you need to stand up, because they will come for you. The reality is that so many people in this country have a biblical view of sexuality. I'm talking about Muslims. I'm talking about lapsed Catholics. I'm talking about all kinds of people that share our values on some of these basic things. And to let somebody say you're a bigot, that you're going to be silenced, that is un-American. That is unacceptable. And we need all to speak up, say, listen, we're not going to force you to agree with us, but you cannot force us to agree with you. That's simply un-American. But we do need to speak up. I have spoken up on this a couple of times on Twitter and on social media, because it makes me angry when people are doing incredible work, God's work, risking their lives, frankly, and then they're being criticized because they don't, check the right box in terms of somebody's sexual ideas. That's simply wrong. But Americans need to speak out against it. It's not acceptable.
Yeah, and we know everybody that comes to that hospital, they're not asking, are you gay? Are you a Muslim? No, they're asking, are you sick? And if the answer is yes, then they help. And that's the way it should be. Now, most of these activists, I've noticed, I have a little saying. I say, not everyone on Twitter is a twit, but every twit is on Twitter. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, I do. It's horrible. It's horrible.
But you're on Twitter as well. You're one of the non-twits on Twitter in my book. By the way, if you're on Twitter, you guys watching, and you're not following Eric Metaxas on Twitter, you should do so. It's very entertaining. One thing and informative, I should say that. One thing you point out is that Ramadan's coming up. When is that? Do you know?
It starts April 23rd. It goes for a whole month.
Okay, so we got a month of Ramadan. How many police officers you think will be writing down license plates and issuing citations of anyone that's celebrating Ramadan?
That just goes to show you, if you don't treat everybody the same in America, you undermine faith in the system. And we, the people, we're supposed to be the system. These cops are supposed to be working for us. The government's supposed to be working for us. So when you undermine faith in those systems by playing games, which some people are doing right now, you hurt every American, every single American. So you've got to treat Christians and Muslims the same. It cuts both ways. Sometimes that hurts Christians, sometimes that hurts Muslims. Whatever it is, everyone has to be treated the same. But we're living in times of political correctness. It's one of the reasons this president has been such a hero to so many, because he stands up against political correctness. But the idea that we're going to have pretty soon a lot of Muslims probably doing things that if Christians were doing them, the cops would be on it. Now, if you do not come down on the Muslims, I would say then you are a xenophobe. You don't think of Muslims as the same. They're different. We don't need to treat them the way we treat other Americans, the way we treat Christian Americans, the way you've got to treat everybody the same in the United States of America. Let's see what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, honestly, I hope that they are treated respectfully and given the rights and freedoms that we all should have and enjoy here in America. And I don't know, do they do online Ramadan? If not, it's a great idea for somebody. So we'll see what happens.
That's right.
Again, this is Eric Metaxas, author of 7 More Men. You can catch him on the Eric Metaxas radio show right there. And we got just a couple of minutes, so take us on out of here. Tell us anything you want to talk about. Let's hear what's on the mind of Eric Metaxas.
I was just going to say, a lot of people, I don't know if they know, but my radio show now is a video show, and if you go to YouTube, if you go to the Eric Metaxas show, you can watch most of the things that we do are on the Eric Metaxas show on YouTube. We normally film in the beautiful TBN studios down here in New York, so it looks fantastic. And now we're doing these bunker videos that look kind of like the way this looks right now, but a lot of it is on YouTube. So if you go to the Eric Metaxas show on YouTube, you can see it. And then we have, if you go to your app store on your phone, you can listen 24/7. A lot of people think that they've got to kind of catch me on their radio
Yeah,
station, but
no.
you can listen anytime you want. And I got to say, this is not to brag on me, this is to brag on my guests. I've had some truly amazing guests on my program. And I just think, man, I wish I could be on CBS, because these guests are coming from, many of them share our values, and they have a way of speaking about it that is just very important. And I just want that to be a resource to people around the country, because these are the people that they're not going to get on the mainstream media.
Yep.
And I try to give them a voice.
Yep. Oh, and we appreciate it. I've seen some of your programs and heard some of your guests and interviewed a few of them here as well. So you're 100% right. I appreciate you giving them a voice, especially from a place like New York City, where a lot of people tend to listen to up there. So that's great.
Yeah.
Appreciate everything you're doing. You guys be sure to check out his book and his website. There's the website right there.
And I can show the book.
Oh, you can
since
show the book?
I have a copy.
You have a copy right there?
I have a copy right there.
Have you read it? Have you read it yet?
It's something, I better read it soon, because I forgot a couple of the chapters. I'm thinking, like, what did he do again? I'm gonna have to read. It's been about 2 years since I finished it. So that's the way it goes in publishing. Yeah.
It is the way it goes in publishing, and maybe I'm sure you've done this, at least because you've written so many books. You glance through and you find a typo and you go, really?
Exactly. Oh, trust me. That's a tough one. By the way, actually, people go to my Facebook page, which is just Eric Metaxas. We've got a contest. We're giving away 7 free copies of this every single week for the rest of this month. So if you find me on Facebook, you'll see that, and you can tell you what to do, because it's all about needing heroes. We need heroes in our culture, and I want to encourage people to tell stories about who has been your hero, whether dad or a mom or whatever it is. So there you go.
Wonderful. Appreciate you doing that. We appreciate your time. And I'm going to leave your website up as we go out of here so that people can spell your name correctly. By the way, if you would just change one letter, you would be Eric Metaxas, which would be bigger and better.
About once a year, I introduce myself. I'm Eric Metaxas, and people say, "Oh, what part of Texas?" And I say, no, Eric Metaxas. It's a Greek name, but Texas is about my favorite state. Every time I come to visit you all, I feel at home. I'm not just saying that. I mean it very much. You guys know what freedom is about, and I love to get there.
Yeah, well, you're always welcome. So once you can travel again, of course. Stay safe for now. Appreciate you again. Here's the website so you can see how to spell it, and catch us again. We've got more great guests. I'm bringing you great guests, just like Eric brings you great guests. So between the two of us, you should have lots of inspiration and information to keep you busy, no longer how long this thing lasts, and beyond. So check out Eric's website, his Facebook page, his YouTube channel, and we will see you here next time on Life Today Live.
All right. Thank you, Randy.